Welcome to Dark Legacies TV, where power, greed, and ambition leave their shadows. Enron, a name once spoken with awe, envy, even pride. It was the darling of Wall Street, the most innovative company in America. Its executives were treated like celebrities. Its stock was a golden ticket that promised limitless returns. But beneath the shining towers of Houston, beneath the arrogance and self-congratulation, there was rot. The story of Enron isn't just about a company that failed. It's about deception dressed as innovation, greed disguised as genius, and ambition so unchecked that it consumed not only its leaders, but everyone who believed in them. This is not just the story of a collapse. It is the tale of a machine built to lie until the truth could no longer be buried. An empire that burned bright and then collapsed in ashes, leaving billions lost and countless lives destroyed. Tonight, we uncover the rise, the fraud, and the fall of Enron. Chapter 1. The Spark. To understand Enron, you must first understand the world it was born into. The 1980s in America were years of deregulation, free markets, and ambition without restraint. Ronald Reagan's administration championed business freedom, slashing rules that had once restricted industries like airlines, banking, and energy. For the right man at the right time, it was a gold rush. And into this moment stepped Kenneth Lay. Ken Lay's beginnings. Ken Lay was not born into power. He grew up in Tyrone, Missouri, the son of a poor Baptist minister. His childhood was modest, even difficult. He pumped gas, worked odd jobs, and dreamed of something bigger. Lay's charm was his greatest gift. He could win over anyone in a room: governors, presidents, investors. His soft southern drawl, his calm manner, his polite smile, all masked a ruthless ambition. By the late 1970s, Lay had built connections in both Washington and the energy industry. He worked with the Federal Power Commission, learning the mechanics of regulation, and more importantly, deregulation. Lay believed in one thing above all: energy was power, and those who controlled it could reshape America. The birth of Enron in 1985, Lay orchestrated a merger between Houston Natural Gas and InterNorth, creating a new company, Enron Corporation. It was a Frankenstein of sorts: pipelines, gas assets, debts, and promises. But Lay had a vision. The energy industry was changing. Natural gas, once sold through long-term contracts, was being deregulated. That meant energy could be bought and sold on open markets, just like stocks. Lay saw an opportunity. Enron wouldn't just deliver gas, it would trade it. It wouldn't just move fuel, it would become the marketplace itself. It was a radical idea for its time, and it would make Enron one of the most talked-about companies in America. The Houston Dream. In Houston, Enron built itself as a symbol of the future. Its new headquarters, 2 gleaming glass towers in downtown Houston, became a monument to ambition. Inside, the culture was electric. Young, hungry talent flooded in. Enron promised them wealth, power, and prestige. If you could sell, if you could innovate, if you could play the game, you were rewarded. This wasn't just another utility company. This was the future of capitalism itself. Ken Lay, the preacher's son, now played the part of the statesman. He mingled with U.S. presidents, from George H.W. Bush to George W. Bush. He funded campaigns, secured political favors, and cultivated influence at the highest levels. But even as Enron grew, its core business, pipelines and gas, wasn't glamorous. The real magic would come when Lay hired a man named Jeffrey Skilling. The arrival of Jeffrey Skilling. Jeffrey Skilling was everything Ken Lay wasn't. Where Lay was soft-spoken and charming, Skilling was brash, arrogant, and razor-sharp. a Harvard MBA who once stunned his professors with his audacity. In a case study about Enron's potential gas trading business, Skilling told the professors, "You're damn right it would work. And I'd run it." Lay was impressed. In 1990, he brought Skilling into Enron to build what would become the company's most revolutionary and ultimately destructive division, Enron Finance Corp. Skilling's philosophy was simple. Enron shouldn't be in the business of owning hard assets. It should be in the business of trading deals, contracts, and ideas. He called it an asset-light model. Wall Street called it genius. Mark to market, the illusion begins. But Skilling's true innovation wasn't in trading gas. It was in how Enron recorded profits. With the blessing of regulators, Enron adopted a method called mark-to-market accounting. Here's how it worked. Normally, when a company signs a contract, it records revenue as it comes in, mark-to-market. The illusion begins. But Skilling's true innovation wasn't in trading gas. It was in how Enron recorded profits. With the blessing of regulators, Enron adopted a method called mark-to-market accounting. Here's how it worked. Normally, when a company signs a contract, it records revenue as it comes in, over time. But under mark-to-market, Enron could book the entire projected profit immediately, even if that profit wouldn't arrive for 10 or 20 years. It was like selling a house, collecting the next 20 years of rent in advance, and pretending it was money in your bank account today. On paper, Enron was exploding with profit. In reality, much of it was speculation, numbers built on dreams, not dollars. But to investors and Wall Street analysts, it didn't matter. The numbers looked golden. Enron stock began its meteoric rise. The spark becomes fire. By the early 1990s, Enron wasn't just a gas company anymore. It was reinventing itself as an energy trading powerhouse. Lay played the role of diplomat, keeping Washington happy. Skilling built an army of ambitious traders, teaching them that risk was everything. Win big, get rich. Lose, and you're out. It was survival of the fittest, capitalism stripped bare. And for a while, it worked. Enron's name began appearing in magazines, newspapers, financial reports. Its stock price climbed. Investors couldn't get enough. But behind the glass towers and the dazzling press releases, something dangerous was taking root. Because once you start booking profits, you don't actually have. How far will you go to keep the illusion alive? Narrator, lowering tone. The spark of innovation had been lit. But sparks, left uncontrolled, can burn down empires. Chapter 2. Enter Skilling. The architect of illusion, Jeffrey Skilling, was unlike anyone Enron had ever hired. His energy was electric, his arrogance intoxicating. To his believers, he was a visionary. To his enemies, a tyrant. But to everyone, he was the architect, the man who would build Enron's empire of deception. Skilling believed that energy was no longer about pipelines and fuel. It was about ideas, contracts, futures, speculation. Money made not from moving gas, but from moving numbers. And in that philosophy, Enron found its new identity. The asset-light dream. Traditional companies built pipelines, plants, or factories. They owned hard assets. But Skilling mocked that model. Why tie yourself to the ground, he argued, when you can trade in the air? Under his vision, Enron would transform into an asset-light company, one that owned very little but controlled everything. Enron would not be the factory. It would be the market. And so, Skilling built the gas bank. Just like a financial bank takes deposits and lends money, Enron's gas bank allowed energy producers to deposit gas contracts and customers to withdraw them when needed. Enron acted as the middleman, the market maker, the one pulling strings behind the curtain. It was bold, it was risky, And on paper, it was brilliant. Investors loved it. Wall Street analysts fell at Skilling's feet. They saw him not as an executive, but as a prophet, the personality of a king. Inside Enron, Skilling's personality defined everything. He was brilliant, yes, but also volatile. His temper could cut through a room like a knife. If you impressed him, you were a star. If you crossed him, you were gone. Employees whispered stories. Skilling walking the trading floor at midnight, intimidating junior traders. Skilling telling an employee, "You're not worth the oxygen you breathe." Skilling erupting in rage when numbers didn't meet his expectations. But there was also charisma. He could inspire loyalty, even obsession. His people believed they were part of something world-changing. One Enron trader recalled, "You felt like you were in the most exciting company on earth. Like you were building Rome or Silicon Valley, but faster, bigger." The rank and yank system. To fuel this culture, Skilling introduced a brutal system of evaluation, the Performance Review Committee, or PRC. Employees were ranked from 1 to 5. Top performers received massive bonuses. The bottom 15% were fired every year. No exceptions. It was called rank and yank. This system created a ruthless, gladiatorial atmosphere. Employees weren't just competing against other companies. They were competing against each other, fighting for survival inside Enron's walls. The result? Innovation, yes, but also lies. If your numbers didn't look good, you found a way to make them look good. If reality didn't match the fantasy, you bent reality, and Skilling rewarded it. He didn't want truth. He wanted results. Mark to market, the magic trick. But none of Skilling's cultural engineering would have mattered without his greatest weapon, accounting. With the support of the SEC, Enron adopted Skilling's beloved system, mark-to-market accounting. Here's what that meant. Imagine Enron signed a 20-year deal to supply power to a city. In reality, that contract might deliver small profits over 2 decades. But under mark-to-market, Enron could predict how much money that deal might make, in the best-case scenario, and book the entire amount as profit today. The deal might be worth billions over time. So Enron reported billions instantly. The problem? If the deal didn't work out, if the market shifted, if the contract failed, Enron would have to face losses. But Skilling had no patience for losses. So instead of admitting them, Enron buried them. What mattered was the illusion of unstoppable growth. Wall Street's darling. And Wall Street bought the illusion. Quarter after quarter, Enron delivered numbers that dazzled analysts. Every time the company reported earnings, they exceeded expectations. Every time a new division was launched, it seemed to promise billions. Magazines called Enron the company of the future. Fortune named it America's most innovative company, not once, but 6 years in a row. Enron's stock soared into the stratosphere, peaking near $90. Investors lined up. Employees poured their retirement savings into company shares. Politicians praised Enron as proof of American ingenuity. Enron wasn't just successful, it was untouchable. At least that's how it looked from the outside. The rise of Fasto. But every magician needs a partner to keep the trick alive. For Skilling, that partner was Andrew Fasto. Fasto was Enron's chief financial officer, a man who thrived in shadows. Where Skilling was the visionary, Fasto was the mechanic, building the gears and levers that kept Enron's illusion running. Fasto specialized in creating special-purpose entities, shell companies designed to hide Enron's growing mountain of debt. Here's how it worked. Enron moved bad assets and debts off its balance sheet. These shell companies borrowed money from banks, using Enron stock as collateral. On Enron's books, everything looked clean. In reality, the company was drowning. It was financial alchemy. And Fasto grew rich from it, taking millions in fees from the very shell companies he created. Lay knew, Skilling knew, but they looked the other way. Because as long as the stock kept rising, nobody cared how the trick was done. The celebrity executives, by the mid-1990s, Enron's top brass were living like rock stars. Ken Lay, the elder statesman, mingled with presidents and senators, giving speeches on free markets and global trade. Jeff Skilling strutted like a conqueror, adored by analysts who hung on his every word. Andrew Fasto built layers of secrecy, rewarded with mansions and luxury. Even Enron's mid-level employees lived lavishly. Bonuses worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were common. Traders bought Ferraris, vacation homes, yachts. Enron became a symbol of not just wealth, but invincibility. But underneath the champagne, the bravado, the headlines, Enron's foundation was fragile. Its profits were exaggerated, its debts hidden, its employees trained to lie. And like every empire built on sand, the collapse was inevitable. Narrator lowers tone, music builds ominously. Jeff Skilling had taken Enron from a pipeline company to a Wall Street darling. But he had also set it on a path of arrogance, deception, and greed. The question was no longer if Enron would fall. The question was when. The cult of innovation. By the mid-1990s, Enron was no longer a simple energy company. It was a cult of innovation. Inside those glass towers, the atmosphere felt more like Silicon Valley than Houston. Employees believed they were part of something historic, a revolution in capitalism, and Enron fed that belief. Every press release boasted a new frontier. Every quarterly report dazzled Wall Street with numbers that seemed to defy gravity. The company wasn't just making money. It was redefining money itself. The Mirage expands. Jeff Skilling's asset-light philosophy spread like wildfire. Enron wasn't satisfied with trading natural gas. Soon, it was trading electricity, then coal, then oil. Eventually, they branched into broadband, weather derivatives, even water rights. If something could be measured, Enron claimed it could be traded. The company presented itself as the ultimate marketplace, the invisible hand of capitalism made flesh. And every new venture came with stunning profit projections. Billions, sometimes tens of billions, were earned the moment a contract was signed. Not a dollar in cash, but mountains of numbers written into the books. To Wall Street, it looked unstoppable. Enron's stock price soared. Analysts called it the future of the global economy. But the reality was different. Many of these ventures lost money. Some never even launched. Yet, thanks to mark-to-market accounting, Enron reported profits anyway. The illusion grew bigger. The mirage stretched farther. And the desert of reality disappeared beneath the glow. The Enron culture. Work hard, lie harder. Inside Enron, a dangerous culture thrived. Employees were young, hungry, and terrified. The rank-and-yank system ensured that at the end of every year, 15% of staff were fired, no matter how hard they worked. That meant survival was everything, and survival required numbers. If your division wasn't producing results, you faked them. If your deal wasn't profitable, you made it look profitable. If the truth was ugly, you painted it gold. Executives encouraged it. Numbers mattered more than reality. Make the deal, Skilling demanded. We'll figure out the details later. And so, lying became part of the Enron DNA. The smokescreen of success. The outside world saw a company dripping in wealth. Enron's headquarters became a symbol of corporate luxury. Employees were given perks most workers only dreamed of: lavish parties, bonuses worth millions, trips on private jets. At Christmas, Enron didn't hand out gift cards. It threw blowout galas where executives mingled like celebrities and champagne flowed like water. The message was clear: you're not working for a company, you're working for an empire. But empires demand loyalty. Enron asked employees to invest heavily in company stock. Pensions, retirement savings, even 401ks were tied directly to Enron's future. To question the company's strength was seen as betrayal. And so, employees doubled down, even as cracks began to show. Andrew Fasto's web of lies. Behind the scenes, Enron's chief financial officer, Andrew Fasto, was weaving an intricate web. The company's debts were ballooning. Failed projects, bad investments, and exaggerated profits were piling up. But instead of reporting losses, Fasto hid them. He created hundreds of special-purpose entities, shell companies that took Enron's debts off the books. It was financial camouflage. On paper, Enron looked clean, lean, and profitable. In reality, it was drowning. Fasto didn't just create these shadow entities for Enron. He profited from them personally. Millions of dollars flowed into his pockets, payments disguised as management fees. It was a breathtaking conflict of interest, but nobody at Enron stopped him, because Fasto's schemes kept the illusion alive. And in a company where illusion meant survival, he was invaluable. The media darling. The Mirage wasn't just for Wall Street, it was for the media too. Magazines hailed Enron as the most innovative company in America. Fortune gave it the crown 6 years in a row. Executives appeared on television, boasting about their vision for a new economy. Ken Lay was cast as the wise elder, the charming statesman shaking hands with presidents. Jeff Skilling was the genius, the man with a vision so radical it seemed dangerous to doubt him. Fasto was invisible, the mechanic in the shadows, pulling levers no one outside understood. Enron wasn't just admired, it was worshipped. The House of Glass. But inside the shimmering towers, some employees began to whisper. Not every division was successful. Many innovations lost staggering amounts of money. Enron Broadband, one of the company's boldest expansions, was bleeding cash. The much-hyped weather derivatives market barely worked. Yet quarter after quarter, Enron announced massive profits. The illusion had to be maintained at any cost. So debts were shuffled, numbers massaged, losses hidden. Enron became a company at war with reality, and reality was losing. The cracks beneath the Mirage. Behind every empire of lies, there are cracks. Analysts began to ask questions. How exactly did Enron make its money? Why were its financial reports so complex? Enron's response was arrogance. Skilling famously snapped at one analyst who pressed for clarity. "Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that, asshole." The audience laughed. Skilling smirked. But behind the bravado, fear was growing. Because the truth was simple. Enron didn't make money, it made illusions, and illusions can only last so long. Narrator, ominous tone as music fades to silence. The Mirage was stunning. It dazzled Wall Street, seduced the media, and convinced the world. But every mirage vanishes when the sun shifts. And for Enron, that moment was coming. Chapter 4: The House of Cards. The Shadow Architect. If Ken Lay was the salesman and Jeff Skilling the visionary, Andrew Fasto was the architect of shadows. A mild-mannered, almost forgettable figure in public, Fasto thrived in secrecy. While Lay and Skilling dazzled investors, Fasto built the machinery that made their illusions possible. His weapon? Special-purpose entities. To most people, SPES were incomprehensible, obscure legal entities buried inside footnotes. But to Enron, they were the perfect tool. They hid debt, inflated earnings, and made disasters vanish from balance sheets. Fasto didn't just use them, he abused them, and through them, he would personally pocket millions. Cooking the books. Here's how it worked. When Enron launched a new venture, say a broadband network or a power plant overseas, it often lost money. Normally, those losses would appear on Enron's books. But Fasto had another plan. He set up an outside company, technically independent, but secretly under his control. Enron would transfer the failing asset to this shell company. The debt went with it. On Enron's balance sheet, the loss disappeared. Instead of reporting billions in debt, Enron showed billions in profit. The shells became graveyards for failed deals, hidden away from the public eye. To Wall Street, Enron looked unstoppable. To insiders, it was a hall of mirrors. The web of raptors. Among Fasto's most notorious creations were the Raptor vehicles. These weren't real companies. They were accounting beasts designed to devour losses. Whenever one of Enron's investments tanked, the Raptors absorbed the failure. On paper, Enron remained flawless. In reality, every Raptor was a ticking time bomb. They depended entirely on Enron's soaring stock price. As long as the stock climbed, the Raptors could be fed. But if the stock stumbled, the Raptors would turn, devouring Enron itself. It was a system built to collapse, and Fasto knew it. Conflict of interest. What made Fasto's schemes truly sinister wasn't just their complexity. It was his personal gain. Enron's board approved arrangements that allowed Fasto to run these shadow entities himself. That meant every time Enron made a deal with one of them, Fasto profited personally. He wasn't just hiding debt, he was robbing the company from within. Over time, Fasto siphoned off tens of millions of dollars. To him, it was just rewards for brilliance. To Enron's employees and shareholders, it was betrayal on a grand scale. The Wall Street enablers. But Fasto didn't act alone. The shadow empire thrived because Wall Street wanted it to. Major banks like Citigroup, JP Morgan, and Merrill Lynch provided billions in loans disguised as trades. Accounting firms like Arthur Andersen signed off on Enron's reports, raking in millions in fees. Analysts who might have asked questions instead praised the company, terrified of losing access, or worse, missing out on Enron's skyrocketing stock. Everyone knew something was off. The numbers didn't add up. The financial reports were labyrinths of jargon and footnotes. But Enron was the golden child of Wall Street. To doubt it was to risk your career. So the silence continued, and the house of cards grew taller. The illusion of infinite growth. By the late 1990s, Enron's valuation exceeded $60 billion. Its executives were paper billionaires. Its employees, many of whom poured their retirement savings into Enron stock, felt untouchable. Jeff Skilling preached about an asset-light model that could conquer any market. Ken Lay boasted of global dominance. But behind the curtain, the financial machinery strained under its own weight. The Raptors were bleeding. Debt was piling up. Even the accounting tricks began to falter. Fasto could move numbers only so far before gravity returned. And gravity always returns. The first whispers, not everyone was fooled. Some journalists, analysts, and even a few employees began to ask the forbidden question, how does Enron actually make money? The company's responses were defensive, even hostile. Transparency was treated as treason. When a skeptical analyst pressed Skilling during a conference call, Skilling snapped, "Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that." A hole. The insult went viral across financial circles. To some, it was a sign of Enron's arrogance. To others, It was proof that the emperor wore no clothes. But the machine kept spinning, the Mirage still shimmered, and Wall Street, desperate to believe, looked away. The pressure cooker. Inside Enron, the culture of deception grew unbearable. Employees worked endless hours, chasing deals that often made no sense. If numbers didn't add up, they were adjusted. If profits didn't appear, they were projected. Failure wasn't an option. Failure wasn't an option. Failure was termination. Some employees thrived in the chaos. Others broke under the weight. Whistleblowers were silenced, either ignored or driven out. Every day, the house of cards grew taller. Every day, the risk of collapse grew nearer. The cracks widened. By 2000, cracks in the illusion were impossible to ignore. Enron broadband, once touted as the future of digital communications, collapsed in failure. Millions of dollars vanished. The Raptors began showing strain. But instead of slowing down, Enron doubled down. Executives pushed harder, lied bigger, spun wilder tales. To admit weakness would have been fatal. So the company sprinted deeper into illusion. It was no longer innovation. It was desperation. A house of cards swaying in the wind. And the storm was already forming on the horizon. The fall begins. The Mirage. Under siege. By 2001, Enron stood as one of the most admired companies in America. But beneath the polish, the machinery was breaking. The Raptors were collapsing. Enron broadband had imploded, burning billions. The accounting tricks that once dazzled now struggled to keep pace with reality. Debt ballooned. Cash evaporated. And worst of all, investors started asking questions Enron could no longer dodge. The whispers grow louder. Inside Enron, whispers turned to murmurs. Some employees knew the numbers didn't add up. Others suspected Fasto's side deals weren't just shady, they were criminal. Whistleblowers tried to speak up. One of them, Sharon Watkins, wrote a now-famous memo to Ken Lay warning of disaster. She described Enron as a house of cards destined to collapse. But Lay downplayed it. He reassured employees and the public that Enron was strong, healthy, and more innovative than ever. Privately, he knew Watkins was right, but to admit it would mean ruin. The Skilling exit. Then came a shock. In August 2001, Jeff Skilling, the man who built Enron's aggressive empire, abruptly resigned as CEO. He blamed personal reasons. He said he wanted to spend more time with his family. But the truth was simpler. He saw the storm coming. Skilling's departure was a signal to Wall Street. If the mastermind of Enron's empire was jumping ship, something was terribly wrong. Stock prices wavered, confidence cracked, and for the first time, the illusion flickered. The media turns. The press, once Enron's greatest ally, began to turn skeptical. Journalists asked sharper questions. Analysts demanded clarity. How does Enron actually make money? The question that had haunted the company for years now became a headline. Enron dodged, spun, and reassured. But the mask was slipping. Shares, once soaring above $90, began to tumble. Investors who had worshipped Enron as untouchable now smelled blood. The market smells fear. On Wall Street, perception is everything, and once confidence cracks, collapse accelerates. Credit agencies grew nervous. Banks hesitated to lend. Investors dumped shares. The more Enron insisted it was healthy, the less anyone believed. The company's arrogance, once admired, now looked like desperation. And beneath it all, Andrew Fasto's schemes were unraveling. Fasto exposed. The truth about Fasto's Raptors and shell entities began to surface. What had once hidden billions in debt now threatened to expose the entire company. If Enron's stock kept falling, the Raptors would implode, forcing Enron to admit massive losses. And Wall Street knew it. Investigators started circling. Questions about Fasto's personal profits made headlines. Conflict of interest was too mild a phrase. This was betrayal on a colossal scale. Enron executives closed ranks, blaming confusion, misunderstanding, or temporary setbacks. But the walls were closing in. Inside the collapse for employees, the shift was devastating. Pensions tied to Enron stock began to evaporate. Retirement savings were gutted in weeks. Employees who once believed they worked for the future of capitalism now watched their dreams disintegrate. Some still clung to hope. Others knew it was over. The trading floors grew quiet. The parties stopped. The champagne dried up. Fear replaced arrogance. The house of cards shakes. By October 2001, Enron announced a $618 million loss. The market gasped. For a company that had bragged about endless growth, this was unthinkable. Soon after, Enron admitted it had overstated earnings by nearly $600 million over the previous years. The truth began to drip out, slowly, painfully, damningly. The house of cards was shaking violently, and the fall had only just begun. The mirage was gone. The whispers became screams, and for Enron, the beginning of the end had arrived. The spiral into darkness. By late 2001, Enron's empire was collapsing at terrifying speed. The once mighty stock, which traded above $90, plunged below $10 in a matter of weeks. Billions in shareholder value evaporated. Retirement accounts were obliterated. For employees, the shock was personal. They had been told Enron was invincible. Many had invested their entire savings into company stock, encouraged by executives who swore the future was bright. Now, their futures were gone. The Raptor implosion, the Raptors, Andrew Fasto's intricate web of shell entities, finally snapped. As Enron's stock price fell, the Raptors could no longer absorb losses. Instead, they unleashed them back onto Enron's balance sheet. Suddenly, billions of dollars in hidden debt came crashing into the open. The illusion shattered. Wall Street panicked. Creditors demanded answers. And for the first time, Enron had none to give. Arthur Andersen's fall. But Enron wasn't the only giant to collapse. Arthur Andersen, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in the world, was revealed as complicit. For years, it had signed off on Enron's books, approving the illusions, the shell games, the lies. When investigators began digging, Andersen employees shredded thousands of documents to hide the truth. The cover-up failed. By 2002, Arthur Andersen was indicted for obstruction of justice. A firm that once symbolized trust and stability collapsed alongside Enron, its name forever stained by scandal. The human cost. The financial collapse was catastrophic. Employees lost not only their jobs, but their life savings. Families who believed in Enron's promises faced foreclosure, bankruptcy, and despair. Shareholders, many of them ordinary people who trusted the glowing reports, watched helplessly as their wealth disappeared overnight. And while thousands suffered, Enron's top executives had already cashed out millions in stock before the collapse. They escaped with fortunes. Their workers were left with nothing. The bankruptcy. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy. It was the largest corporate bankruptcy in American history at the time. The fall of a $63 billion giant shook the global economy. News cameras captured the haunting images. Once proud employees carrying boxes out of the Houston headquarters, silent crowds gathered in disbelief. the Enron logo hanging like a ghost above the empty tower. The most innovative company in America was dead. The political fallout. The collapse wasn't just a business story. It was political. Ken Lay, once celebrated as a visionary, had deep ties to Washington. He had advised presidents, donated heavily to campaigns, and lobbied for deregulation that fueled Enron's rise. Now, politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Photos with Lay vanished from walls. His calls went unanswered. The kingmaker was now a pariah. The trials of greed investigations followed swiftly. Jeff Skilling, Andrew Fastow, and Ken Lay were charged with fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading. Fastow, faced with overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty and cooperated. Skilling fought, maintaining his innocence, but was convicted and sentenced to more than 24 years in prison. Ken Lay, the founding father of Enron, was convicted as well, but he died of a heart attack in 2006 before sentencing. The trials exposed every layer of the illusion, the lies, the greed, the arrogance. Enron had been less a company than a con. The shadow that remains. Enron's collapse wasn't just the end of a company. It was a revelation. It revealed how far corporate greed could go unchecked. It showed the dangers of blind faith in markets, deregulation, and innovation without oversight. It destroyed trust in auditors, analysts, and executives who had worshipped profit above truth. The echoes of Enron changed laws, reshaped Wall Street, and left scars that still linger. But for the thousands of employees who lost everything, the lesson came too late. Enron promised the future. It delivered ashes, a house of cards built on arrogance, greed, and lies. And when the wind came, it collapsed. The aftermath, Enron's collapse, left devastation in its wake. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Their retirement funds, tied almost entirely to Enron stock, were wiped out. Families faced foreclosure. Futures evaporated overnight. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Pension funds that had invested heavily in Enron saw billions vanish. The ripple effect spread far beyond Houston, shaking Wall Street, Washington, and global markets. For ordinary workers, Enron was more than just a failed company. It was betrayal. The trials of the Titans. Justice came slowly, but it came. Andrew Fastow, the architect of deception, pled guilty to fraud and served 5 years in prison after cooperating with prosecutors. Jeff Skilling, the aggressive visionary, was convicted of fraud and insider trading. He was sentenced to over 24 years, though later reduced. Ken Lay, the charming face of Enron, was convicted on multiple counts of fraud. But before he could be sentenced, he died of a heart attack in 2006. Lay's death became symbolic. The man who built Enron never faced true punishment. For many, it felt like another injustice. One more shadow added to the legacy. Arthur Andersen's death, the scandal claimed another titan, Arthur Andersen. Once one of the Big Five accounting firms, Andersen had been complicit in Enron's lies, shredding evidence, approving fraudulent books, and prioritizing fees over truth. Indicted for obstruction of justice, Andersen collapsed. Thousands of accountants around the world lost their jobs, guilty or not. It was proof that even the watchdogs had become part of the machine. The Sarbanes-Oxley revolution. Enron's collapse wasn't just the end of a company. It was the birth of reform. In 2002, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was signed into law, introducing sweeping changes. CEOs and CFOs had to personally certify financial statements. Penalties for fraud became harsher. Accounting firms faced stricter independence rules. Wall Street would never be quite the same again. But the question lingered. Had the lesson truly been learned, or just buried until the next scandal? The myth of Enron. In the years since, Enron has become a symbol of unchecked greed, a warning against blind faith in innovation, and a case study in how ambition, left unchained, can destroy everything. Business schools teach it, documentaries dissect it, journalists revisit it. But for those who lived through it, Enron wasn't a lesson, it was a wound. The promise of wealth turned to ashes. The empire of light collapsed into shadow. The echo of greed. Today, the Enron towers still stand in Houston, repurposed, renamed, stripped of their infamous brand. But for many, the shadow lingers. Every time a new scandal breaks on Wall Street, the ghost of Enron rises again. Because the story isn't just about one company. It's about a truth as old as civilization. Greed builds empires. Greed destroys them. Enron's legacy isn't just in bankruptcy filings or trial transcripts. It's in the shattered dreams of its workers, the tarnished trust of its investors, and the reminder that even the mightiest towers can fall. Another story written in shadows. This is Dark Legacies TV. Every legacy leaves a shadow. Which one should we uncover next? Subscribe and stay with us.